Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Zane. Zane, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here, man.
Well, it's great having you. Zane, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I think I'm a pretty boring person. I just play guitar a lot, and I'm enlisted in the Marine Corps. But that's pretty much it.
Well, you're far from a boring guy. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. But so that you know, I want to thank you for your service to our country. I really do appreciate it.
I don't know how to respond to that. No problem, I guess.
No, that's okay. No need to respond to that. Zane, your first encounter happened when you were in the 6th grade. Do you think if you would have had that encounter as an adult, it would have been easier to deal with than having it as a kid the way you did?
I don't really think so. I think it's just the shock and awe of the situation is just applicable to any age, especially the self-doubt that comes along with it.
I know that might seem like a strange question to ask. Most people would think, well, of course, as an adult, it would be easier. But some eyewitnesses say that they think it was actually easier having an encounter as a kid than as an adult. As a kid, did you like going into the woods, or was that not your thing?
Oh, I loved going through the woods, hiking around, because I was from a pretty, urban area, or is it rural area? So, I didn't have a lot of that when I was younger, so when I moved to a more wooded area, I was always out there.
Sounds like when you made that move, you were in hog heaven then.
Oh yeah, I was having a great time.
Yeah, spending time in the woods is fun. That is, if you don't have a dogman chasing you. How did that first encounter you had affect your interest in going into the woods?
For a decent amount of time, I was really iffy about it because I wasn't, entirely sure what I had seen. Plus, at that age, there's that self-doubt, like I had mentioned before, like, you don't know if it was your imagination or not. But it scared me pretty bad for a while, but I eventually got over it.
Well, I'm glad you did get over it, and yeah, what happened to you would shake anyone up, so can't fault you for that. You waited for a long time to tell your dad about that first encounter. Do you think waiting so long to tell him made it harder for you to deal with it, or easier?
I think that it helped me a little bit, to be honest, because I was able to get it sorted out in my mind. It was just, hearing negativities from, like, your family in the sense of, like, oh, no, you probably didn't see that. I felt like that was going to be a lot harder than me just saying, oh, maybe you didn't see what you thought you saw.
Well, also, too, from what I understand, your dad was pretty understanding, a lot more so than most people's dads would be.
Yeah, he was... I think it's because of what he experienced, kind of made him a little bit more open.
Now that you touched on that, please tell us more about what you were getting at there.
I had 2 experiences, like, directly, and my father, I had found out after I told him, had a similar experience that he had not told me about. I'm not sure if it was because he didn't want to scare me or what that may have been.
What did he tell you about his encounter?
He said that it was 2 or 3 in the morning around winter time, and he heard a bunch of dogs barking out in the woods next to our house. The woods from our house are 50 or 60 feet out, like straight out the front door. And he went outside and he could see their flashlights in the woods and he could hear the dogs barking. It's like they were right on the other side of the fence. And they were chasing something. So he's yelling out, he's like, hey, shut the dogs up, I'm trying to get some sleep. And all he could see was the flashlights and whatever it was that the moonlight shined on. And he saw a very 7 to 8 feet tall creature running on its hind legs. He said that the bounds that it was taking were 3 to 4 feet every step. It was just booking it. He said he wasn't really sure what to think about it. And that just kind of weirded him out. he thought he had seen a Bigfoot, but he started thinking about it after like I told him what I saw, and he did say it was very canine-like.
You did say that he had his encounter before you had your first one, didn't you?
No, he had it before my second encounter.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I was wondering about that. How did he respond when you told him about your first encounter then?
He was skeptical. He wasn't super skeptical. It was just, he was a little bit iffy about it. I think it was because he didn't want me to get scared, of going out and stuff like that. But after he started opening up with me, he became a lot more understanding. And it almost became like a joke around the house. Like, maybe it was, we named it Bob because when I was little, I watched Over the Hedge and it was like, hey, when you name things, they're less scary. So I was like, Bob, that's not a very scary name. So we called him Bob. So Dad was like, maybe the sound you heard was Bob. And I was like, haha, funny.
Well, yeah, it could have been a lot worse. At least you had him to help support you, and I'm so glad he responded the way he did. That had helped quite a bit.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah, that's great. From what I understand, the woods around your home growing up had some interesting history to it. Please expand on that for us.
Well, there are a couple of things that we hadn't talked about beforehand, but moonshiners were very frequent in our woods. Like, my friend Talon and I were out, and we found this big pit, and we started digging, and there were just jars upon jars buried under the ground. But there was an old colonial house, like, right in the field across from our house. Our woods were built, like, there were hayfields, so there was 100-foot wide rectangle of a hayfield, and then there would be a little patch through the woods that would lead into a bigger field, and then it was just entirely surrounded by pretty dense wooded areas. But there were 2 old abandoned houses back in there. One was more recent. It wasn't super recent, though. I would say early 1900s, but the colonial house was from easy the 1800s. Like, it was super, super basic house. It was built out of, like, logs, and you just tell the age of it by the way the wood sat, I guess. Or it looked, its appearance.
Wow, well, besides the dogmen and boogers running around that woods back then, it sounds like a great woods to spend time in.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. A lot of hills and stuff. There's plenty of valleys to explore. It's like every time you went out, you would find something new.
Yeah, it must have been a great place to spend time in. All right, Zane, please tell us about your encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
All right, no problem. It was 6th grade. I would say midwinter, around 5 to 5:30, and the reason I was outside in the first place, and the only reason I'm so sure of the time, is I had gotten a new dog, and it was a little beagle, and we wanted to have it to where we could let her off the chain and not have to worry about her running away, and if she did, that she knew where to come back. So I would go out there with her for 2 hours every day. It was 4 to 6, just to get her accustomed to the land so that when we let her go, she would come back. And I was about, 3/4 of the way through the time with her, and I was laying on a dirt mound, just looking at the clouds because I was bored out of my mind. ADHD will do that to you. And she starts barking down towards the left corner of our field, and that's where the woods start. A little bit like the corner of our land was woods, and then that led back over into the other land that was, the majority of the woods. But this tall, black, at the time, all I really could call it was thing, ran out of the woods. It was 7 to 8 feet tall. I'm sure of that because I went back down the next day to investigate, and I was looking at the branches that it had ran by, stuff like that. It didn't leave any footprints, so it was running very lightly. I didn't hear any footsteps when it was running, but the speed it was running was incredible to me. Like, I'd never seen anything move that fast in my life. It ran about, I'd say, over 100 feet in just like 2-3 seconds. It felt like forever though watching it run because you're so astounded. It had very canted legs, like they were crooked back, but it was a very thin creature. It was toned, but it also looked all I can think of is like a starved dog. You could see its ribs, not out of the skin or anything, but the way its skin wrapped around its ribs, the light would reflect off the top of the ribs. Its fur was very short, but it was not patchy in any way. The way that I think about it sounds kind of dumb, is like Chihuahua fur. You know, it's very dense, but it's not very long. It was so black, it was almost pearlescent. It had a purple sheen to it, the way the light hit it. And as you went up the body, it had super long, lanky arms. The hands were not huge compared to its body, but they were pretty big, very long fingers, I remember. It had pointed ears. I don't remember seeing a tail, because at first I thought maybe that was a bear, but bears don't stand the way it stood. It was very humanoid. It had very good posture, but as it was running, it came out of the woods on 2 legs, and then dropped down to 4, and then came back up onto its 2 legs, jumped over the cattle fence, which is, 4 feet tall, took a very, very sharp left turn, which really caught me off guard, and just hopped right back over the other side into the woods. As it was running, it glanced over to me, it tilted its head, and I noticed its eyes, and its eyes just pierced my soul. They were like a bright yellow. I don't know, it was, you look at animals, and their eyes are very, it's just eyes, but like, if you look into a person's eyes, you can almost see personality in them, and that's what I saw with it. I just got this instant feeling of dread. I just froze in place. I couldn't move. I had no idea what I had just seen, and like, when my thoughts actually picked back up, like, all that self-doubt just hit me. I had another experience my freshman year of high school, and I had a shed, and it was like 10 to 20 feet away from my dad's shed. You would come out the door, take a right, take another right, and there would be a little staircase, and his shed was right there. It was always super, super dark in that area because the woods surrounded the shed, so not a lot of light broke through. So in the back of the shed, it was pitch black. In the front, there was some moonlight, so you could kind of see. But I had left my phone in my dad's shed because he was a mechanic and we were working together previously, like an hour or 2 before. It got dark pretty quick. It was around 7, 8, maybe 9 max. It wasn't super late, but it got dark super early because it was around the same time I had the previous experience. It was like midwinter. So he has his flashlight, he's shining it at the door, and I have like this little baby flashlight that you get at like Lowe's or something. And I'm sitting there trying to get the key, and I heard rustling in the brush about 30 feet to my right, 20 or 30, and I turn, and when he turns his flashlight, I see the glow of the eyes and just the long, slender shape of what I'd seen before. I'm not entirely positive it was the same one that I'd seen before, but like, you get that gut feeling. It had a familiarity to it that I can't really explain any other way. It was just watching us. It was standing straight up in the brush, about, less than a foot away from a tree trunk. If we hadn't heard the rustle, we wouldn't have even known it was there. It was less of the fact of I didn't know what it was, and more of the fact that it was just watching. It was just standing there observing us that really freaked me out. We went into the shed. I was panicking. I grabbed my phone, sprinted back up to my shed, locked the door, and then we ran straight up to the house. And I had a mental breakdown in the kitchen. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating. I had this sense of dread. I was crying probably more than I've ever cried before, and that wasn't very characteristic of me. My mom didn't know what was going on. Talon was freaking out. Talon's my friend. We just didn't know what to think about it. I knew as soon as I saw it what it was, but it was still the shock, It felt pretty much the same as the first time, but if anything worse, because, it's like it was attached to me somehow.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, one encounter, and That's a happenstance type situation, but you have a second encounter in the same place, apparently with the same dogman, and yeah, that's a little too much of a coincidence, so I get it. How remote was your property back then?
We lived about 30 minutes from the nearest town. We had a dollar store about 4 miles away from the house, and that was kind of like our thing. We had a small town there. Is it okay if I disclose the location? It's not like giving away my address or anything.
Sure.
Okay, it's a place called Parrotsville in Tennessee, eastern Tennessee. It's like I think it's the third oldest town in Tennessee or something like that. And that's like near the dollar store, so it's like 4 or 5 miles away from the house. We were on 10-acre property, so we lived about 5 acres. I know that's a square measurement, but about 5 acres away from our neighbors. So it was a pretty good distance. Our driveway was about a mile long. So, it's pretty decent distance away from most other people. We had a cow farm next to our house, which is one of the things I think attracted it, because we would find calf legs like really deep in the woods. So I was thinking maybe it was just like easy prey for whatever it was.
Yeah, that was remote. No wonder you had a dogman problem. Did you ever hear about anyone else having sightings in that woods besides your dad's around that time when you had those two?
I talked to the farmer next door, the one that owned the cattle, and he said that he hadn't seen anything like that, but he had seen what he called a black panther, and it was up in the left corner of his barn, tucked down. And he described the fur very, very similar to the way I described it. But black panthers aren't exactly naturally occurring, so I don't know how that may have happened. I think he may have seen what I saw, just bunched up in the heat of the barn, and the only reasonable thing he could think of was, it's a black panther.
Yeah, you just might be right about that. How would you describe the heads of the two dogmen you saw? Did they remind you of any particular movie werewolves?
I don't watch a lot of werewolf movies. It was very coyote-like, though, in the sense of super slender. The snout was, it wasn't a short snout or muzzle, if I'm being super specific, but it was very slender. The entire thing was very, very bony.
Yeah, that must have been a sight to see. I think I know the answer to this next question, but which one of their physical features disturbed you most?
The eyes. They destroyed me, man.
Yeah, that's what I thought. What was it about them?
They were very, it was not a naturally occurring shade of yellow, or I'm trying to think of a color to relate it to, that would be like universal. Like the yellow folders that you had in school, like the fluorescent yellow folders, is very, very similar to that. Like even in the dark, like 5 or 6 o'clock, when it was starting to get dark out, you could see them. They almost glowed, and that's kind of it. It just seemed unnatural to me.
Well, as I'm sure you know, most eyewitnesses say that the eyes shook them utmost. So, yeah, that doesn't come as a surprise. Do you think the first dogman you saw didn't realize you were there until it was in plain view of you, or do you think it wanted you to see it?
I don't know if it wanted me to see it. I think that, to be honest, it just didn't care if I saw it. It was just going to do its thing no matter what. I think that my second encounter, it didn't want me to see it, because the way it snuck up, there would have been way more brush movement if it wanted me to see it, unless it kicked a limb like, haha, look at this guy. But the first one, it's like it was doing something and it just couldn't be bothered by my presence. But it wanted me to know that it knew that I was there.
Well, I could be wrong, but I'd bet you good money that it knew full well that you were there with your beagle and it just wanted you to see it.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I'm sure it's not lost on you that a lot of listeners who listen to the show think they'd love to have a dogman encounter. What would you say to them about that, having experienced two of those on your own?
by no means was it a pleasant experience for me. But a lot of the time, before that, I was always fascinated by Bigfoot, and I was like, oh man, I'd love to see Bigfoot. But a lot of the people don't think of the fear that naturally kicks in. It's like a survival instinct that kicks in when you're in those situations, and it just creates this dread, and you can hear stories about things. It's just like ghosts. Everyone always wants to have a ghost experience, but once it happens, it shakes you to the core whether you want to believe it or not. You may act like it doesn't bother you, but deep inside you know that it definitely does.
You make some great points. Yeah, you want to have that experience, but once you have the experience, that's when all the fun stops. Considering the sense of dread you felt when you saw both of those dogmen, do you think they're supernatural in nature?
I don't know, really, because I hadn't been able to put a name to what I saw until I started doing some very, very extensive research about what I saw. Like, instead of trying to find sightings of a big black thing in Tennessee, I, went way more detailed, and that's when results started popping up, and that's eventually what led to me finding your website. But I had a lot of really strange experiences in that house, and I don't know if, it may have fed off that energy, and that's why it stuck around that house so much. I have no clue.
You just touched on this, but you didn't go the distance. What did you think they were before you found out that they were actually called dogmen?
Through my research, a lot of the reports that I saw that were remotely similar, they were all Midwest, though. Most of the reportings I found that kind of reminded me of it were like over towards California and, those areas. Very desert areas. But my dad thought it was Bigfoot for a long time, but it was too canid to me, very dog-like, which is how they got their name, I'm assuming. But I wasn't sure, to be honest. I was thinking, I found reports on a creature called a Wendigo, which is a Native American spirit that, fed off of fear, and it was like the guardian of the woods, and it was known to take the shape of very bony creatures, and usually animals of the woods. So that's kind of what I was leaning on, but I was never positive by any means.
Well, after having an experience like what you had, no one can blame you for trying to find some answers, and it sounds like you kind of jumped to a conclusion when you thought that they were Wendigos, but you just didn't have the information you needed to go on and form an accurate conclusion, so yeah, I can't fault you for that. Now that you know they were dogmen, what do you think dogmen are?
I did some extra research once I was able to put a name to it, but if I were just to put a description to it without any additional assistance or like what I would have said at the time if I had discovered the name, I would have just described them as watchers or observers, hunters, I guess, in lack of better words, because that's really what it reminded me of, is just the silence and observance of a hunter. They just wait for hours upon hours. I don't think that they're violent by any means, because the sneakiness of it could have definitely gotten me. But I don't really know how I would have defined it, aside from very watchful.
Yeah, they do a lot of watching, but they also push the issue on a pretty common basis as well, unfortunately. After what you just said, I think I know how you're going to respond to this, but I want to ask you nonetheless. Do you think all dogmen should be wiped off the face of the earth as a menace or left alone?
They should be left alone. That I know of, they haven't hurt anyone. So why? That's just like, say, bears, People die because of bears, but no one's ever like, hey, let's wipe them off the face of the earth, because they're just doing what comes naturally to them. And the creature that I saw, it didn't harm anyone, so there's no reason to hate it or, want to eradicate it.
I like the way you think. That's impressive. A friend sent you a message a few months ago and shared some interesting info with you. Please talk us through that.
One of my close friends, he's like a brother to me. His name is Dakota. he messaged me, like you said, a couple of months ago, and he was like, this is how he started. He's like, hey man, this is really important. Message me when you get the chance. I'm like, all right, man, what's going on? He goes, you remember that big thing we saw in the woods? I was like, no, I'm not sure what you're talking about. He goes, that big black dog looking thing that we saw when we were out on that tree stand that you built. I was like, no, I'm not sure I remember that. I built a tree stand back behind my dad's shed. It was about 12 feet off the ground, I'd say, and it was overlooking like where the corner of my woods started on our property. And I don't remember seeing this, but he said that he had seen, very similar to what I had seen, a large black dog-like creature running through the brush. I remember hearing movement in the brush, but I don't remember seeing anything. And I was like, no, I don't remember that, but what about it? He said he had been seeing it in the fields behind his house, by the woods. Someone moved out of the house in front of his house, and he said he had been seeing it by the wood line up by their house, and it seemed like it was watching him now. And he was freaking out, and he was asking me what I had done to deal with, the internal struggle when I had seen what I saw.
That had to blow you away when he contacted you and told you about that.
It was terrifying, because he's like one of the most grounded people I've ever met in my life. So it was super weird to hear that from him.
Well, as you found out, even the most grounded person, if they have encounters with dogmen, then yeah, naturally that's going to tend to shake them up quite a bit. Please talk us through the problems you've had as a result of the 2 encounters you had.
I've had a lot of difficulty talking about it, for one. I didn't start opening up about it until, like, very recently to my friends. After that second experience, I was just like, because most of the self-doubt that I had had was erased, because at first I was like, oh, I was young, maybe it was my imagination, but being the age that I was, I knew what I saw, so that eliminated most of my self-doubt. But like I said before, talking about it has been one of the biggest problems. I recently put up a post on Reddit, and they were actually the ones that put, that's a Dogman, and that's when I started looking into it. And that's how I found your website and everything, along with extra research. I was trying to find a place where I could talk to someone who knew what they were talking about. I've had a really bad fear of the woods for a couple of years. Like, I didn't even want to go outside. Dad didn't know what was wrong. Mom didn't know what was wrong because I hadn't told them. I didn't tell them till a little bit later, a couple years later or so. But it was weird because after a certain point, I didn't want to let it get in the way of my life, because I love being in the woods. But from then on, it was never really the same going into the woods. It would be like 110 out, super bright, no clouds in the sky, and you'd go into the woods and it would get dark and dreary. You always felt like you were being watched, like 24/7. When you were in the woods, you just felt like you were being watched. You would hear footsteps behind you, and nothing would be there. I've experienced that with multiple friends of mine. I experienced it with Talon, the friend that I had the experience with the shed at the shed with, and my friend Dakota, who apparently saw the same thing I saw when we were out on the tree stand.
So from what you're saying, you still, to present day, can't go into the woods without the hair in your butt standing up.
Yeah, it's weird.
No, I get it. Yeah, that's almost to be expected. You just touched on this. One day you and a friend were hanging out in your shed when something unsettling happened. Please tell us more about that.
Yes. My friend and I used to stay out in my shed pretty late because I had a pretty decent setup out there. We were playing games. We had music going. It was very low, though, so we were trying to hear the game audio. And we were sitting there just talking, and we heard a very loud bang on the back wall of our shed. It was a rectangular shed. We were on the shorter side, like one of the shorter sides, and it was the back side that was facing towards the woods and towards the stairwell down towards Dad's shed. Or not stairwell, but stairway. And we called my father out. We freaked out, sprinted towards the house. He came out with his handgun. He didn't see anything, obviously, and we decided to investigate ourselves the next day to replicate the sound. And we tried punching the wall, and that wasn't quite it. We tried kicking the wall, that wasn't enough. We dropped a couple of things on the wall, because we used to hang tools on the back of the wall. We dropped the heaviest tool that we had, which is called a Spalding rod. It's just like a big rod of iron. We dropped it on the wall. It was close, but it didn't, you could hear the metallic sound. But what we wound up getting to make the sound as close as possible was he grabbed a very thick branch, like I'd say 2 or 3 inch thick branch, and just slammed it up against the side of the wall. And that's eventually how we recreated the sound.
Well, we're never going to know for sure what it was that did it, but I've got a pretty good idea of what it was. A year after you had that shed experience, you say your dad seemed to become paranoid. Why do you think he was being paranoid after that experience? What did he do to make you think that?
I'm not sure what sparked it all. I don't know if he had another experience that he didn't want to tell me about. But he started buying cameras and game cams. He bought like 2 or 3 trail cams, It may have been more than that even, because we had them all over the yard. But he wanted me to put them in places that had a wide outlook of the yard, and he always had me facing them towards the woods. So out in the front of the house, he had me facing it towards the wooded area where he saw it running across the driveway. He had me put cameras down by where I saw it. He had me put them in the back of the shed. And then he had me put some out in the field that faced the cow field.
Well, I can't blame the man when you know that things like dogmen are running around your property. It tends to make anyone paranoid, so no, that's no surprise. That makes sense. Did you ever have trouble with nightmares because of your encounters, Zane?
Actually, I hadn't really thought about that. I kind of repressed this. But I had one dream where I was running through the woods. It was late at night, and it was talking to me. I could hear the footsteps behind me. They were very muffled. It was like a, But I stopped and turned around, and it was talking to me. I can't remember what it was saying, but I just remember this very deep, it was a very grumbly voice, like gravelly. But it was very strange to me, because I had seen it, but in the dream, it's like I'd had a perfect picture of how it looked, It was like, it was instantly mapped out into my mind as soon as I saw it. And this was shortly after the second encounter that I had by my father's shed.
Wow, yeah, that's a pretty creepy dream. That'd make anyone pretty happy to wake up. Well, Zane, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing those experiences with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.